Chaired Professor of Family Enterprise at INSEAD. His research focuses on entrepreneurial leadership, particularly in emerging economy research, focuses on entrepreneurial leadership, examining both new ventures operated by first-gen founders as well as mature organizations operated by Gen Next Scions on family businesses. His research delves into topics such as the structuring of upper echelon teams. These include funding teams, new ventures, boards of family businesses, investor teams of VCs, family offices, etc. The emergence of family businesses group, the link between successful entrepreneurial exit and social impact, efficacy of entrepreneurship training, and so forth. He is an invested speaker and advises entrepreneurial companies and professional investors on these topics. Professor Vissa has received numerous research awards and is currently serving as Associate Director at the Strategic Management Journal. In addition, he previously served as Associate Editor at the Academy of Management Journal. He also served as elected chairperson of the Entrepreneurship and Strategy Interest Group of the Strategic Management Society. He teaches topics related to entrepreneurial leadership, corporate venturing, transitions in family businesses, and scaling up new ventures in degree programs as well as in executive training programs, using a variety of pedagogical approaches, including simulations, workshops, and case-based learning. Currently, he is directing INSEAD Leadership Program for Senior Executives, India, and numerous client-specific programs. Prior to finishing his doctoral studies from the London Business School, Professor Vissa was involved in setting up and growing new businesses in different specialty chemical niches for Unilever India. We would now like to listen from you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. That was a pretty long introduction. All I can say is that I felt like coming back to school, because I went to IIM, but IIM Calcutta long time ago as a MBA student. It struck me, it's interesting that somehow IIM Calcutta was missing in this group, the earlier session. I don't know why, but anyway. So it was great to come back to another IIM. And also to pretty close to where I did my undergraduate training as an engineer. I studied in Pilani, which is not very far from here actually, pretty reasonably close. Okay, let's get started. First thank you to Amit and Niharika and the rest of the team for inviting me. I'm actually an entrepreneurship and family business, I did my PhD in strategy. And so it's interesting that I get invited by the OB group who are very entrepreneurial in getting people from across the management discipline to talk. We had a bit of to and fro on what I should talk about. And I'm in retrospect very glad that the topic I'm going to talk about actually gels very nicely with the earlier session, which was around the future of management research in India. So I'm going to talk about management research and opportunity for Consilience. I'm going to spend a little bit of time first getting what you guys think about management research as India-based researchers, and then I have a particular point of view, and I'm happy to engage with you on that point of view, but I want to first share with you my point of view, and then we can have a discussion. Okay, right. So first, please go into whip your phone out, and then you can go into Google. Sorry, let me go here. You can just look at the QR code, or just type. What will you type? You will type Menti code on your Google, and then enter 22044713 to join the poll. The poll is asking for a very simple question. How much do you agree with the statement? It is very hard for an India-based author to publish in top-tier journals. When we say top-tier journals, I mean UT Dallas, FT50, the kind of rankings that are around these days, those kinds of journals. Okay, are you able to go in, and is it showing this question or something else? Okay, different question, no problem. Let me just present this, and then maybe it's a good idea to just show this screen. Yeah. Okay, we have 2 responses, 7 so far, good. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just randomly pick something. Okay, so on average around 4, the distribution is more right skewed. So, okay, so let's conclude that it is very hard to publish out of India. As India-based researchers, very hard to publish in top-tier FT50, UT Dallas kind of journals. We'll take that as a given. Now I want to go into something else, which is I want you, it doesn't matter whether you've scored 4, I mean whatever, whether it's 10 or 1, I want you to go and tell me why. Why is it very hard for India-based authors to publish in top-tier journals? And I think I put a little bit of a note there saying, try to be succinct, just use few words, and then tell us why you think it's very hard for authors to publish, India-based authors to publish in top-tier management journals. Has it advanced to the next question? If not, you just reset or reload. Yeah. Methodological rigor, novelty of research idea. Well, it comes back to the last panel, like originality. I really like that comment. Theoretically weak. No networking with editor. Okay, I think that may matter at the margin, but I think I'd like to think it matters only at the margin. Who knows? Sorry? As network scholars, yeah. Okay, that's interesting set of points there. Acceptability, novelty, context, those are the bigger font size tells us there are more people who've kind of focused on that. Lack of originality, lack of ecosystem, unknown norms, acceptability, novelty, and data and context. Okay. Any idea on what this acceptability, what do you mean? It's okay. I mean, let's imagine these are all Chatham House rules. What gets discussed in this room stays in the room. Can I please get 1 or 2 people to share? What do you mean by acceptability? Can you give any more further insight into what that means? Just raise your hand and just say, yeah, please, just speak loudly. I'm not sure if they can hear you. I can repeat the answer.
So, I went to a conference in Israel.
So what is acceptability for you? That's it. Simple. Don't have to give you a background and all that. Just say what is acceptability for you.
So let's say I am researching Marwari groups or Marwari community. So when I write to a journal, let's say international journal, so I'll have to explain a lot, setting the context, because the editor or the reviewers might not be aware about that phenomenon. Yeah, so in that sense.
That's acceptability, okay. So they're not clear what Marwari groups may represent, particular ethnic. So there's a literature on ethnic entrepreneurship, so maybe you got to be using labels like that. Okay, there's another hand raised at the back.
I think in general, we do not have access to what exactly is the journal looking for. In comparison, when I spoke to international doctoral students, they have a very clear understanding of, oh, this is what the journal wants from us.
Okay.
So sometimes we don't know, our research can make contribution to the journal, but we don't know how to present our work in a particular way that is acceptable to the journal because we don't know the standards sometimes, and we do not have access to that network that knows these standards.
Okay, understood. So this is the, sorry, one sec, I'm hoping this works. Yeah, it does. Let me go to the next slide. Yeah, so I think the point you were making is very unknown norms, is it? Is that what you mean? Okay. Okay, so I just want to get this as a baseline, and then let's get into what I want to really talk about. We'll come back to this in the end, towards the end. Okay. So in my mind, I think there are forks in the road ahead for management scholars out of India. Okay, and it's related to what was discussed in the earlier discussion around competition and so forth, right? So before that, it's good to set some background basics, which some of us already know, but it's still useful to lay it out there. You know, all these natural scientists, they have laws. We learn them in school, no? Laws, Newton's first law, Newton's third law, all those laws we learn. But in social science, we don't have laws, right? We have frameworks, right? Because we don't have anything with law-like regularity. We have frameworks, and frameworks are very useful. Frameworks consist of theoretical concepts and explanations, which are called mechanisms, which link those concepts, right? And this is true across all social science, starting from psychology all the way to political science. And usually what happens is in social science, a given social phenomena typically has a multitude of frameworks with which different scholars look at that same phenomena, often with very diverse concepts, very diverse explanations. This is the bane, if you will, of economics is special because they have a paradigm, but in all the other fields, especially in management, it's pre-paradigmatic, right, in the Kuhnian sense. So all these frameworks are typically tested empirically in particular contexts. Even experimental research in lab experiment, the population of interest is 20-year-old undergrads in the United States. Okay, that's really the model population. And then we have others maybe in India and other places. But fundamentally, it's tested in a particular context. So for India-based scholars, like all of you, most of you in the room, in your quest for global impact, and globalizing Indian thought was, I think, extraordinary. I never knew about it, and I'm glad I came and learned and listened. Really appreciate those efforts. So if you are, trying to make this kind of global impact as scholars based out of India, in my mind at least, happy to be corrected, as always, we can always think of an alternative, path C, but I have only put it very starkly as a path A and a path B. What is the path A? Develop uniquely Indian management frameworks, right? Or contribute to existing Western-derived management frameworks, right? These are fundamentally a choice, and then we can say, hey, why not combine the two? Okay, so imagine there's a budget constraint, you can only choose red pill or blue pill. I was just sharing with my dean the other day something on this, red pill, blue pill, he said, I want both. I can't give both. You got to pick one or the other, right? So like that, imagine that you have to pick one or the other, right? Path A, develop uniquely Indian management frameworks. Path B is contribute to existing Western-derived management frameworks. And imagine you had to pick exactly one choice, A or B. What would you pick? Okay? So let's go and do that poll. Which path should India-based researchers choose to make a global impact? Wow, evenly tied. I don't know if this is updating. It's not updating. I'll switch to Menti. I think that might be. People are, okay. You already done this. Okay, let's see this. 4 and 2. Develop uniquely Indian frameworks. Interesting. Okay, let me pause here, and I think we're kind of done. Why is it not updating? I can see the full one, but on the screen it's showing something else. Hang on. Okay, is this correct? Okay. Interesting. Wow. I'm glad this came up because I'm going to actually argue for just the opposite. Okay? So I'm going to hopefully try and persuade you that it's actually better, I think, in my again, from an outsider perspective, it's better to contribute to existing Western derived management frameworks as a way to make a global impact, and I'm going to give you one side, that's my side, and then we can have a discussion. Why? Because the majority of you think it's this, right? That's interesting. Okay. So let's move to the next slide, which I want to talk about why did you pick what you picked. Okay, so why is it not changing screen? I can end this slideshow. I'm just switching screen. Now it's showing up. No, but it's not this one. It's actually this. Yeah. Okay, sorry for the technical glitch, but for those of you who voted Path A, why? Data is easy to collect. Okay, data is easy to collect. We're talking about frameworks. Sorry, I think maybe you misunderstood the question. The question was, Path A is develop uniquely Indian management frameworks. What are frameworks? Frameworks are concepts and explanations. Okay, your data which you test can be from India, that's different. We're talking about framework means concept and explanation. There are many concepts and there are explanations linking them. That's what a framework is. It's in other words a theory. So should you develop India-specific theories or Western, contribute to Western theories, right? So if you're saying, for those of you who voted Path A, if you're saying uniqueness, Indian context is unique, that's what everyone says about every context, right? Americans say America is unique, think about MAGA, right? We are special, that's what they're saying, right? I mean, let's not bring politics into all this, but every country thinks they're unique. Meaningful, relevant, richness of information, data is easy to collect, differences in context, okay? Sorry? Models of Arthashastra, I like that. Okay. So that is a uniquely Indian framework, right? Arthashastra, for example, has concepts and explanations which are uniquely Indian, right? And but if you try and publish an Arthashastra based paper, it's going to be very hard for you. That's the reality, okay? And if you want to publish it in Vikalpa, like the gentleman who pitched for it earlier, it's not going to get you very far in your career. I'm pitching to the young people in the room, right? Doctoral students and assistant professors, because it's not yet listed, right? It's not yet listed in the Web of Science and Scopus, and it's far away from being in the FT50 and so forth. Right? It'll get there hopefully, but it's not there yet, okay? Right, so then can I focus on the ones who voted for B? The path B was what? Contribute to frameworks that are currently in existence, which are basically derived from a Western setting. Already a conversation, generalizability, yeah, good, okay. Culture is a moderator, absolutely. Piggyback, careers. Won't isolate, yeah, okay. I think these are all the points that I was also thinking of, piggybacking and triggers curiosity. It's already a conversation, absolutely. Difficult to be innovative. Okay, so I want to pick up on some of those points. I think that the originality point is super important that came up in the last panel. But how can we be original even when we are using Western-led frameworks is really the question we want to talk about, right? So that's really the focus of the main point of my talk, and it's like 20 minutes into it. But I think we have a good idea where we're getting to, right? So, my general point is that part B, which is trying to contribute to existing frameworks, which are usually 99% Western based. There are a few things which are around Japanese management, but fundamentally it's all Western based, very specifically US based, right? So, why part B might be an opportunity, I want to piggyback on this book by this prominent biologist called E.O. Wilson. Wrote a very nice book in 1998 called Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge. Has anyone read that book by any chance? If not, I highly recommend doing so. Biologist Wilson, he's a very interesting guy. E.O. Wilson, he's an entomologist, and he actually is the only scientist I know of who's been physically attacked for his scientific views in the 20th century. Okay, so he was he's a professor of entomology, and he started that way. Entomology studying ants, colonies, social animals, ants. And the guy was giving a seminar at Harvard in December, and then a bunch of students went up to him and poured, like it's really cold, right? They poured really cold water on him. Okay, they attacked him for his scientific views. The reason is because he is actually the founder of a subfield of biology that's called sociobiology. And sociobiology is a very, so the sociobiology idea is that human beings, we think of ourselves as very special compared to other animals, right? And again, in the Western world, and in original Indian thought, it's not that way, by the way, right? In the Western thought, it is that way. And derived from religion and so forth. Man is made in the image of God and so forth, but not the animals. So, social science was always considered special compared to natural science, right? And there is some element of truth in it, like social science, your proton or electron doesn't matter, it doesn't react to you observing it, right? It's H whatever, what we learned about how to make water, H2 plus 2, what is the equation, does anyone remember? H2 plus 2O2 gives 2H2O, something like that. 2H2 plus O2 gives 2H2O. So H2 and O2 are not going to be worried how you theorize about it, right? So in natural science, the objects of theorizing are not going to react to your theorizing, and they are not even aware and so forth. So whereas for human beings, it's not that way, right? So therefore, social science always considered special. Sociobiology, invented or discovered by E.O. Wilson, really got everyone's hackles up, particularly a bunch of folks who believe human beings are blank slates. And then he said that actually human behavior in groups is no different from a group of zebras, or wildebeest on the Serengeti or whatever. So think about it. There are a lot of biologists who study social behavior of animals, and then there's a lot of parallels between primate groups and so forth and human groups. And so why it became very controversial was because E.O. Wilson's ideas, and he was approaching it as a scientist, not as an activist, and it came about 150 years ago in the Western world. There was all this stuff around Darwinism. Darwin came up with this theory, and then there's a whole bunch of guys who said social Darwinism, and poor people are poor because they're stupid. This is kind of the basic argument that was given, and so there were all these dark undertones that led to the Nazi issues, racial purity, the whole stuff, all of that was based out of social Darwinism. And a lot of people attacked this guy because they thought that he was trying to revive those ideas. As far as I can tell, he's a very eminent scholar. He doesn't have any such views, but he got attacked nevertheless. He wrote this book, 1998, called Consilience, and emphasizing the unity of all of science, social science, natural science and social science, which at that time was a big, big achievement. And in fact, his grand goal, going back to what was mentioned in the last discussion, is eerie. Because remember, one of the gentlemen at the very end, who's director of, I think, IIM Trichy, he was talking about how art is actually can be considered part of the tree of knowledge of science, right? And that was part of the goal of E.O. Wilson. In his mind, even art and all of these artistic fields can also be unified. So Consilience is actually an interesting book to read. I just want to make sure that I'm using the word in a much more modest way today. Okay, so I'm talking about consilience, but not of unity across the natural and social sciences. That is way beyond my pay grade. Okay, I'm just going to talk about simple stuff, which is I'm referring to ways of theorizing that promote accumulation of findings, research findings within and across management subfields. Right? Within and across management subfields. What is management subfields? All the people who go to the Academy of Management meeting. Right? How many of you go to Academy of Management meeting, AOM? Right? I mean, at least heard of AOM as a thing, right? So you will have OB, HR, strategy, entrepreneurship, technology and operations, technology and innovation management, whole range of things like that, right? So think about it as trying to unify and accumulate research across those fields, which is itself very daunting, if you think about it, right? And the reason it's daunting is because management research, particularly in subfields which I'm more familiar with, which is driven by observational data, so not lab experiments, observational data, they're often developed in silos. So a good example I can give you, and I think some sociologists of science have to study why that is the case. There's a massive literature on family business. Okay, because I'm an entrepreneurship professor and I study entrepreneurship in emerging economies, it's something which struck me as very odd. Because in emerging economies, when we study entrepreneurship as a phenomena, we cannot separate out first-gen founders from family business. They're intertwined, right? They're intertwined. Yet, in the Academy of Management, there are separate journals for something called Family Business Review. There's a whole bunch of scholars who study family businesses. They have mostly nothing to do with the scholars who study entrepreneurship. And those guys who are studying entrepreneurship are folks who are interested in Silicon Valley. And then the guys who are studying on family business are looking at these big family-owned whatever companies in the US, and succession is a big issue. And the family business scholars in US have nothing to do with another group of international business scholars who study something called family business groups, and I contribute to that literature as well. So the literature on family business groups has evolved separately from the literature on family businesses. They just don't talk to each other. There's never been any cross. In fact, I wrote a Journal of Management Review article. There's literally 0 papers on family business groups that ever cite an article on Family Business Review Journal. 0. Okay, but then they're actually studying more or less the same phenomena. Right? So there is a huge amount of silos in our management literature, and these are things that we can think of as opportunity. From our point of view, this kind of consilience enables a deeper scholarly understanding for management researchers, which means that, you know, if the field is interested in this kind of consilience, trying to promote accumulation of research findings and so forth, then this sort of path B is actually an opportunity for India-based scholars, right? And I'm going to come to why it's an opportunity and how it's an opportunity. To do that, I want to just re-emphasize something by another gentleman, Professor Jim March, that almost all of us in this room will know. So he had this very nice quote trying to make a distinction on concepts versus context, okay? And it's actually worthwhile reading the quote, right? Most students of organizations aspire to a more general understanding of organizations and appreciation of how the contextual factors affecting organizations intersect with context-free sets of ideas about human behavior, institutions, history, and society. should really read and ponder over this. Okay, very interesting article he wrote, and the title of that article is also fascinating. Okay, and this was written in 2004. He wrote this in the inaugural issue of MOR, Management and Organization Review. Okay, volume 1, issue 1. And the title of the paper is Parochialism in the Evolution of a Research Community, the Case of Organization Studies. Notice the word parochialism, right? So his point was that, we have these frameworks which are more general, context-free ideas around organizations, human beings, history and society and social groups, but much of our frameworks have been tested in a particular empirical context, which is developed economies, largely the United States, but they do stuff in UK or in Europe and stuff like that. By the way, MOR was a journal which was started in China about 20 years ago, and now I don't know what the status of the journal is, but in many ways the Chinese were trying to go down the path A, which is trying to create uniquely, they were trying to create a new journal which would accept, of course, Western framework-led research, but also had a soft spot for so-called Chinese management. Okay, in the Academy of Management, there's actually a big group of folks who look at Chinese management and so forth, just like you have a group for Latin America and for Europe. And so I think even in India, there is a branch of the Academy of Management. I don't know how active it is. The Indian Academy of Management, right? So the Chinese Academy of Management, I don't know who's behind the MOR, but they invited Jim Marsh to write an essay in the very first issue of that journal, and he focused on this very important point. There is concepts and frameworks, and there's context, and how it is actually an opportunity, right? He doesn't use words like that, but I'm telling you guys my take on this, that it's like an opportunity, right? Because everyone wants to know how generalizable their theory is or framework is, and how we can enrich and elaborate on some framework that's already been developed, right? So that's why I'm saying one possible answer to this question of why that Indian context matters is all of these frameworks developed and tested in the US, but the Indian context very important to advance management research in at least two ways. First is deepen existing frameworks by extending the boundaries of generalizability, which is what some of you wrote in the word cloud we saw earlier, right? So extending the bounds of generalizability is a contribution, is an important contribution to a framework, saying I am able to show that this works even in this kind of a setting, right? So, but then you have to add back something to that framework. Otherwise, just replication study alone in one setting is very hard to publish in a top-tier journal. It has to be, in SMJ, I'm an editor right now in SMJ, there are some, the co-editor, they've written something around what is constructive replication. You can look it up, okay, and there are ways to do constructive replication, so I would encourage you to focus on those kind of issues. You can also broaden existing frameworks by reorienting research which is well understood by providing a very novel explanation. And also connecting unconnected literatures. I gave you the example of family business group and business family business. If there are ways to connect those, then it becomes an interesting and important contribution because you are connecting disconnected literatures. I'm going to give you 3 examples and then we try and have a conversation after that. Oh no, you have to do a little bit more work, okay? Okay, so what is the first example? The first example is a PhD student who's senior PhD student, I think it's a job market paper, using the Indian context to advance research on corporate political activity. I deliberately chose 3 papers which are kind of different in different domains, okay? So this is Sukrit Puri, and this is working paper, Political Attachments of the Family Farm. So what does Sukrit do? He offers a very novel explanation for corporate political activity. Prior work, if you think about corporate political activity, there are 2 groups of scholars who study it. One is a bunch of political scientists, and they publish in, American Political Science Review, American Journal of Political Science, blah, blah. So what do they focus on? They basically say political action is purely profit maximizing activity by the firm. And they study America, and that's what happens. You pay off everyone so that you can maximize your thing. And then there's also a literature in management, which some of you may know, which is all these upper echelon top management team folks who study political giving, corporate political activity, and they find that actually corporate political activity is shaped by the ideology of the people leading the organization, the CEO, the leader, the senior leadership. What is their political ideology? That drives where the company gives, right? And then this guy comes along and says, in fact, actually neither of those may be true, but in this particular setting, I'm going to advance an entirely new explanation on what drives corporate political activity. And what he's focusing on is that not all firms are the same. There's a dramatic difference between family-controlled firms and non-family controlled firms. And he uses the Indian data to study it. You should go and look at his working paper. It's there on SSRN. And just amazing because he's got the entire corporate political donations from 2003 until date, including the ones that the electoral bonds which have been released. He's in fact got a paper looking at the stock market reactions of the companies who have been giving, apparently anonymously, but now that it's been released and stock market reactions have gone all up and down, right? So this guy, what he finds is that in fact the ongoing social relations of those family firms shapes the political giving. So he shows that family firms controlled by families from a certain ethnic group, all right, went back to Marwadi groups. You had asked Marwadi. So go and read that paper because he uses the language of co-ethnics, right? There's a literature on co-ethnics. I have published a paper on venture capital valuations and so forth. So there's an existing literature, existing framework, useful to hitch your ideas to that framework, right? So you instead of talking about Marwadi groups, you can talk about co-ethnics, right? Marwadis and other Marwadis, Marwadi versus non-Marwadi. So what he shows is that in fact, because of these social relations, family firms from a particular community give to a candidate from that community irrespective of whether the guy wins or loses. And this is nothing to do with either maximizing or political ideology. It's basically driven by what in management we call it as the Granovetter's idea of embeddedness, social embeddedness. So social embeddedness in families, and you'd be happy to know Prasad's all networks. So ongoing networks of relations. So that's when it just becomes really the family firm is the giving is shaped by the particular community and family they're embedded in. So very novel. How generalizable is this result we don't know, but you can think of it as extending to many emerging market contexts, not just India, right? And so it's novel. It's a working paper. I don't know where it will get published, okay, but I think it will land in a good place. I think it's a very interesting work. But this is an example in my mind where someone has taken very well-known frameworks, very well-known, well-understood relationships. Hey, companies give to political parties either because they just want to maximize return or they want to, the CEO, the person, the leader at the top has a Democrat or Republican orientation and that's how they give. That's all the work that has been done in the US, and only the US allows you to do this work. Why? Because in the US the data is available. Again, going back to the earlier panel, there is an explosion of data availability in India. You won't believe this guy Sukrit spent apparently a year, scraping off all the data on every single registered corporate giving in India. All the way from 2003, because that's when the records were being kept in a way that he could access. Because in India there are very interesting laws around what political parties report. It's from political parties, not from the company. Political parties have to report when organizations give them money beyond 50,000. Just think, just 50,000. Now many of us may argue in India, black money and all. Black money cannot be studied. By definition, it's not, there's no visible trail, right? But at least let's study the white money that is there and see what comes up, right? And this is what he finds. So, which is interesting. So, Going back to the fact that data is easy, there's explosion of data, but you can use it to address a well-known framework, come up with a very novel explanation. Again, paper has not yet been published. This is as an editor, and I've been editor for a while now, so I think I have some reasonable judgment on papers, and I think this paper will land in a good place.
So this is like one president in the US right now insisting on loyalty. So the same concept would then be generalized to American scenarios, right? Where they would want to fund companies based on political loyalty.
I don't even want to go there, but you're right. Yeah. So if you start writing things like that, you will get rejected. Be very careful. Yeah, it is generalizable. I agree, Prasad, but it's just be careful when you write around, because it's such a polarized environment. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, but I would be framing it differently. I don't know how we'll write it actually. Right? It is generalizable to the right? Okay, so that's one example. The second example that comes to my mind is an interesting paper which is my colleague Jasjeet's PhD student Shukti in SIAD. So what is this example? It's using the Indian context to kind of broaden the research on supply chain decarbonization. Right? This is again very interesting study because again working paper, okay, Shukti, Ghosh and Singh. What they do is, it's a Fortune 500 multinational company. Think of it as a Western one, probably headquartered, I don't know, they don't share where it is headquartered, because it's actually very sensitive. It's also a great example of collaboration with big companies, right? So you have these scope 1, scope 2 and what are called scope 3 emissions in sustainability in this whole thing around climate action. And scope 3 emissions means I as a big multinational company, not only should I know what's going on within my operation and my direct supply chain, but I'm also accountable for the guys, primary producers and so forth, through whom? Through my entire supply chain. And decarbonizing them is also part of my responsibility as the scope 3 emission, as a big organized entity. So what do you do? How do you think about scope 3 when your suppliers are poor and barely literate? Because this is a company that buys from small farmers across India and other parts of the world, and they buy a bunch of commodities. But those farmers are customers of or on the value chain, and therefore this big multinational is responsible under scope 3, which is not yet there, but they're trying to make sure that by 2035 they're committed to scope 3. How do you get there, right? So how do you even think? Obviously you cannot write a contract because it is not enforceable credibly anywhere. The guy you're writing with doesn't even understand what the hell that means, and then they're focused on livelihoods, basic economic security. They're not paying attention to all this stuff. So they use a relational contracting approach as a way to study this rather than formal contracting. And there is a literature or a frameworks around relational contracting. They take those frameworks, and then it's a nice field experimental study, and they have 2 treatments around that field experiment. There's a baseline control where they just give some basic knowledge around scope 3 and leave it there. Then the treatment 1 and 2 are basically personalized support to the farmers. And what they find is actually the second treatment, which is a high investment strategy from the point of view of the big multinational. They give broad support on farming practices and so forth to the farmers that enables the farmer to get a better crop yield and so forth, and generally helps their income. Not just with that specific crop which they are selling to the MNC, but their entire occupation as farmers. So it's there's a whole bunch of things you can read the paper, but again it's a working paper. They show that it enables this big company to both do good and also do well. They actually get better retention of farmers. Farmers come back to them for the next season for the same crop. Okay, and so that's a big saving for them. Instead of going and finding new farmers for their supply chain, they're able to get repeats. Right? So that actually is very efficient for them. And as an investment, per dollar invested, they get a lot more bang for the buck. Again, very interesting setting. Going back to I know tomorrow I'm doing a workshop, and earlier I had conversations around mixed methods and so forth. I would say any good research has to be mixed methods. The question is, where will the interviews come? Will they be in the method section, of a quantitative paper, or will they be in the big front end? That's all. So this is a field experimental paper, but they have done extensive interviews and identified a whole bunch of things which farmers look out for, and that's how the treatments were designed, right? So it's not just like off the shelf. So that's where the context and the deep knowledge and understanding of the context comes in as a way for us to give an aha, right? The third example is something which was a paper which published in SEJ. This is a paper that I accepted in a special issue. That's why I know a lot about the paper, which is around, it's a qualitative paper. Okay, it's mainly a qualitative paper, but they also have a nice, interesting methodological innovation. What they study is healthcare ventures, and there's a kind of social venture. And then they look at how jugaad, which is actually an Indian concept around frugal innovation, and how jugaad actually happens in social ventures. And the interesting part here is, of course, they show that they have a nice way to conceptualize how social entrepreneurs can mobilize resources through this kind of semi-formal way of raising resources, which I call as non-market logics. They appeal to community concerns and how those resources are actually used, right? The governance of the resource. A lot of it is social network-based governance rather than, again, formal contracts or authority. So another interesting thing is they had a methodological innovation. They had a little portion around something called event structure analysis, which is interesting for management scholars. Been used in other parts of social science, but they brought that kind of technique to first time to management. So again, this is another way to make an impact in a top journal. If you step back, and I want to wrap up in another 5 minutes, and then we can have a Q&A, okay? If you step back, how do you come up with interesting research topics that leverage the Indian context, right? Couple of points. First thing to note is all research is social activity, right? Research is socially constructed. For us to say, hey, that's a great research question, where does that come from? It comes from the community of other scholars. It's not like, it's all social construction. So relevance of research, socially constructed. What does that mean for us? Going back to some of the earlier, the word cloud points, yes, you have to network and so forth, but even before you network, read. Go and read what is popping up in a typical review or a perspective article. Go and read the Academy of Management annals on the topic you're interested in. Go and read the Journal of Management special issue on literature review on a topic you're interested in. Or whenever there's a special issue, read that introduction very carefully. Why? Because those articles are very useful for framing our research questions in a way that will appeal to some specific subcommunity. Then you can also look out for meta frameworks. I'm going to give you examples from some of the reviews that I have done, because I know them I know that better than others. But many review papers will have some kind of a meta framework which allows you to think systematically about what might be new research questions in a topic that I'm interested in. And then you also have to pay attention to something else, which is, it's not just enough to say I have a novel perspective, I have novel data. You really need to pay attention to this thing that's going on in social science, on credibility revolution, okay? So you need to have cutting edge research, design, and the reporting of research results, okay? There are 3 things I want to talk about here. The first thing I want to talk about is pay attention to causal inference. This is particularly important for observational studies. Lab studies, less so, okay? But there is a very nice book by this guy Cunningham. It's called Cunningham's Mixtape. If you haven't heard about it, look it up. He also runs workshops and so forth on a bunch of causal inference related stuff. And it's very hard to publish in top tier journals now without clear understanding of all these issues. You're not going to make much progress, okay? Second is think about research reporting. This is again, this is a big issue in psychology and social psych and OB. Amit is smiling, right? So this is a massive issue because of all these scandals around staples back in the day, and you can ask your professors, they'll tell you the details. But then this issue of what is a prediction versus what is a post-diction, right? So there is something called harking, hypothesizing after results are known. In the past, this used to be par for the course and people used to publish that way, but now it's no longer the case. You have to register, pre-register your study, especially experimental studies, you have to pre-register. If you're doing field experiments, you have to pre-register. Even observational studies, you may have to pre-register. In fact, I have a working paper where we are trying to pioneer pre-registering an observational study, which is strongly theory-led. If you have a very strong theoretical framework, then you can pre-register even an observational study. But most of us in this room trying to do research with Indian data, it's very hard to have very strong theoretical frameworks because there are multiple frameworks that may collide and you don't know which one is going to work. So SMJ actually has a lot of articles on this. There's question-based research, there's abductive approaches to kind of inference to the best explanation, if you will, with observational data. This is more relevant, this last bit for observational data, question-based abductive approaches. Again, think of it as conducting exploratory research with observational data, right? So I would say you have to pay attention to this because otherwise it's really not going to move the needle, right? So in other words, it's not just the novelty of the explanation. Novelty explanation has to be matched with the credibility of the research design to test that explanation. Both have to go together. Otherwise, you're not going to see much success, right? Okay, last point. These are just examples from my own research of these meta frameworks I talked about. If you go and look at this thing, this is an introduction to a special issue that I did with Brian Wu in Michigan and Moder, who's a psychologist at NUS at the time, on entrepreneurship in emerging economies. And we have a nice organizing template here on how to think about resource mobilization in entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurs do fundamentally two things. They think of novel ideas and they go and get resources to execute on those ideas, and they lack those resources themselves. They have to get it from others, resource holders, right? And the prototypical story is the Silicon Valley growth venture. But in Silicon Valley, what happens? The governance, firstly, the action logic by which resources mobilized is based on pure market logic. Everyone is parting with resources because of the market logic of self-interest and return, and the governance of the resource is basically formal governance, contracts. Everything is contract, right? So, but that is just one cell, and if you just broaden out the action logics, you can think of action logics which are completely non-market, guided by community or family and so forth. You can also think about very informal governance mechanisms. So immediately you have, this is one cell, but you have these 2 by 2 coming up, and then you can think of, hey, can I do something in this cell 4 which is less studied, and is there a way to, does my India context offer me a setting to study entrepreneurship, resource mobilization in cell 4? If so, it's very understudied, or in cell 3 relative to this stuff, which is studied to death, right? So that might be a way for you to think about new research topics. Another example is something which I told you about this paper I wrote with in Journal of Management on family-controlled business groups. Again, here what we talk about is how you can think about borrowing frameworks from contiguous areas to study family businesses. And you can go and read the paper for the details, but it's a useful way to think about family business. So in this paper, what we find is all the work on family business groups has a very macro institutional voids kind of orientation. And we say, hey, it's time for the field to switch to a more micro foundation based approach to study business groups. Right? So that's a way in which we can reorient and then say a lot of work has happened on this kind of institutional voids kind of way of looking at things. Now we're going to bring something new to the table, and also to connect different kinds of hitherto unconnected literatures. So I know we are out of time, so I'm going to probably skip this part. I was thinking that maybe you can work together and create some buzz groups and come up with some novel research ideas. But instead of that, what I'll do is we can just have 5 minutes for questions. Okay? And then we end. Okay? It's a nice, let's see if this timer starts. Yeah. We can just have a Q&A 5 minutes and then we can end. Yeah, please.
So probably I am speaking for the group which is committed for developing the new.
Sorry, one second, you need to use the microphone. Just give your name and your department or where you are, just so that we all know where you're coming from.
Yeah, so my name is Ashish Pandey. I teach in the School of Management in IIT Bombay. My area has been, our whole research program has been inspired by bringing Indian wisdom to the main scientific discourse in the field of management. I have half a dozen FT50s. All of them have been kind of inspired by Indian ideas. We have correlated with the Western, but we have tried sincerely that how these Indian ideas can extend the existing discourse. Recognizing this very well, and of course I have not been editor or could not make it to the AMR or AMJ, but a few FT50s we could make it, JOM and General Business Ethics and personal those kind of things. But that, having said that, what really concerns me is the publication and the academic credentials which are required to begin our career. So this strategy is really very, very good. It's very important, very, very useful in the middle range thing. What in the long run we may miss out by not bringing the Indian framework, that I will articulate in 2 minutes by giving example of mindfulness research. Mindfulness research is a big industry. My JOM paper happened because I worked on the mindfulness. But after doing that, I decided I am not going to work on the mindfulness, in spite of this being easier way. And then I went to the path of yoga and doing the Ashtanga yoga based research. Problem is that mindfulness term is coined 30 years ago based on one concept called in the Buddhist literature, though it's a clear Buddhist origin, Buddhist literature, a term called Samyak Smriti. Buddha never talked about Samyak Smriti in the isolation. There are 7 other things which are part of the Ashtangic marg. Samyak Smriti is not possible without having Samyak Karma, Samyak Sankalp, Samyak Samadhi, Samyak Vyayam. All this is required for Samyak Smriti to really realize. When I reduce the Indian or Buddhist or Shinto or whatever, I am missing out on the whole knowledge stream which is behind it. So we are actually succumbing and discounting the whole worldview, practice in the benefit of aligning with the existing framework.
That's a very good point. I think I agree with you. The way I look at it is the following. That's why I use the quote from Jim March, right? The Management and Organization Review, MOR. Started in 2004 or something. But today it's actually quite a well-known journal. It's not yet in the FT50, but it will at some point. So like that, but that is not relevant for the young people in this group, who are trying to advance their careers, PhD students and junior faculty. I feel that at the level of the deans of the big institutions, you really need to, and maybe Vikalpa the journal, I don't know, but India needs to come out with a journal like the MOR, where you are trying to appeal to Western frameworks, but also there is a soft corner, if you will, for Indian, India, what was the phrase used? India-based thought, is it? I don't know. He was globalizing Indian thought. So to globalize Indian thought, you need a journal or a couple of journals, and that process has to start at a different pay grade, if you will. It has to be done by the leadership of all the deans of the big institutions to start a journal, and then it will take a decade, maybe 2 decades, to establish itself, even to reach FT50. MOR has not yet reached FT50. So I'm just pointing out that it may be the way to go, because trying to convert an AMJ into or an SMJ into accepting the full framework of Buddhist thinking or Indian thinking, right? Buddhism, Jain, they're all more or less the same. So that is going to be very hard to do. But from a pragmatic point of view of building careers and so forth and becoming exposed to global competition, this is the way forward to bring in these ideas. But I am with you that eventually A and B will have to come together. The part C will be through a journal which is sympathetic to A as well. But that is something which may be Vikalpa, but he's saying Vikalpa was not even listed. No? So
just to sort of summarize, I'm going to sort of interpret it in one way. That is, add Indian culture as a moderator to existing frameworks, and also add new mediators that are unique to India.
I would say that is the low-hanging fruit. That is the low-hanging fruit, but then India offers so much more new data sources to address entirely new research questions that have not been studied at all, because that such data was not available. That is really the great opportunity. That is a massive opportunity.
And the other thought I had was, you talked about Arthashastra, and there was a comment a long time back that Machiavellianism, that Prince, the Prince that Machiavelli wrote, actually when you compare Arthashastra to the Prince, it's like Prince is like a kindergarten kid compared to the complexity that Arthashastra did. So to some extent, if that's the case, then why not anchor and expand Machiavellianism, but using Arthashastra concept?
You could, but going back to his point, they're so different that you're probably better off just the concepts and frameworks from India are so, I think, different. You can't take one concept in isolation, which is what the mindfulness research guys have done. Because like he's saying, Buddha had, like the Buddhist thought has a whole bunch of other concepts related to it. So I feel that way the Arthashastra has got a whole system of thinking which is kind of different from the whole Machiavelli way of thinking. There are definitely overlaps. They are like, I would think of them as overlapping sets. Right? So the question is, what is worth your while? So, last question and then we end. It's already past 6:30. We can carry on the conversation at light entertainment. There's light entertainment after this, right? Okay.
Good evening, sir. I'm a young strategy scholar of IIMA. My question is, I'll keep it concise basically. There's a lot of heterogeneity in India in the phenomena itself, right? Whereas if you need
heterogeneity in
the phenomena, say for example something is within India also.
Can you give an example?
Like something, let us say, how entrepreneurship is happening in Bihar versus how is it happening in Bangalore, as in just comparing two states. Now, in order to capture this phenomena and take it to an FT50 journal, a lot of places I have heard that as in you need to sometimes collaborate with a global scholar. Now, I see it as a liability of origin. What is your thought on that? I'm not sure if I am able to explain.
I understand. Let me summarize the question. There is entrepreneurship in Bihar could be very different from entrepreneurship in Bangalore. And then if you want to combine all of them into one label in entrepreneurship in India and work with some collaborator abroad, it's going to be a problem. I agree 100% with you. This is not a problem new to India. If you go and talk to Kathy Eisenhardt, who's a friend of mine and a very esteemed entrepreneurship and strategy scholar, when she says entrepreneurship, she means something completely different from what another gentleman called Howard Aldrich, who's just retired recently, a sociologist, also a big entrepreneurship scholar. When they use the word entrepreneurship, they mean entirely different things. And that's part of the problem in our field, right? It's called the jingle and jangle fallacies, right? The jingle fallacies, we use the same label, we mean completely different things. So for Kathy Eisenhardt, the Bangalore entrepreneur is the entrepreneur. You're creating a growth venture. and raising capital for all of that and venture capital. So that is growth entrepreneurship, and that is really entrepreneurship for her. Howard Aldrich, self-employment is entrepreneurship. You can be a little hairstylist, a barber in Bihar, and that is your own entrepreneur because you're not actually on someone else's payroll. You're running your own little company and you have one person working for you. That's entrepreneurship for him. And this is very endemic in social science, right? Like if you ask economists and sociologists, they will talk about entrepreneurship basically as self-employment. Whereas if you talk to some management scholars like Kathy Azenard or myself, I would think of entrepreneurship, again, depend on, so you have to be clear on what you are studying. Are you interested in the growth of organizations that have high growth potential? In that case, you will have to go to Bangalore and study them because you're not going to find them in Bihar, very unlikely. Right? And because these high growth potential ventures will have capital backing them and so forth. But they may be very simple, like Flipkart is not that novel in terms of technology, but it is a business model innovation. Right? There was already Amazon working in America. Everyone saw it, it was working. And then they brought, the great genius was to actually make it work in India. It is so hard to do that. Right? So what is entrepreneurship depends. So I don't know if I've answered your question clearly enough. I'm just saying that this heterogeneity is there even in other parts of the world, not just in India.
No, but taking help of a Western framework to explain this heterogeneity.
This is not really, the Western framework works here too. The guy in Bihar is not building a growth venture. The guy in Bangalore is more likely to be doing so. So those are two different definitions of what is entrepreneurship. So very beginning you need to tell people, your reader, what do you mean by entrepreneurship? Right? So I would say that you need to clarify that right at the beginning and then select your sample accordingly, the population. I think I'm kind of done. Sorry, we are 5 minutes over, 6:30, 6:35. Okay, thanks a lot. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope you guys had a good time.
Thank you, Professor, for an interesting session. You've definitely left us with some food for thought. We're going to think about it, and we're definitely looking forward for your session tomorrow.
But have your dinner too.
For the workshop. More food then. May I request Professor Niharika to please present a token of appreciation to Professor Vissa Balagopala.